Hey guys, before we start, a quick shout out to Alpha Dog Nutrition for sponsoring this podcast. Alpha Dog products are now available at dusupply.com, and you can use code ALPHADOG15 at checkout for 15% off and a credit for free shipping to try it yourself. Now let's get you to your podcast.
Where's Fielder? He's gone to the dog.
Did you push that big red button, Steve?
I did.
That's
I had
the
my
big
finger
red
on the
record
button.
I'll tell you a quick funny story. I had you know how people, anyways, we're already not talking about dogs, but I had a little box. I built this little box. In today's age, they'd call it a bomb. You know what I mean? They'd call in the bomb squad for it. But it was a speaker. I was an electronics geek, and it was a speaker that when you push this button, it latched a relay, and so it made this little siren go off, and you couldn't turn it off except for there was a little hole in the bottom. You had to shine a flashlight in that hole to get it to turn off. It was a little gag thing. And so you'd set that box with this big red button, and you put a sticker on it that says, "Do not push." You want to know how many people push that button?
Oh, yeah.
It's like saying sick 'em to a bulldog, right?
Oh, man. I remember I was in typing class, and I was a senior in high school or something, and I had that. And there was this kid typing, and I was like, he looked at it, and he starts typing again. I'm like, damn, that's going to be the first kid that doesn't push the button, you know? And I just see him out of the corner of his hands. He got his right hand on the typing keyboard, and his left hand just slides over to that button. And he pushes that button and goes beep in the middle of class. You know, everybody's like, "What's that sound? What's that sound?" And this kid is just like locked up, pretending like he's typing, like he can't hear nothing.
Oh man,
I know dogs like that. I don't know what you're talking about. Nothing happened there.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, this could be the class clowns club, because I was always pulling stuff like that in school too.
Oh,
I didn't in school, but my famous move was when my buddies would bring their cars in to get worked on at the Toyota dealership. I had these real special jumper wires I made up with T-pins, so I could basically jump their horn to their turn signal.
right.
I wasn't a total jerk, because if I did it to the headlights, they'd just go all the time as soon as they turned them on. But turn signals were pretty sweet, because I knew which way they had to pull out of the dealership.
Right.
And I knew that they wouldn't hit the right turn signal until they hit town, basically. So I'd wire that thing up in there. And about half hour later, they'd be pulling back in. And, Doobie, what'd you do to this thing?
Turn signal on and starts honking. Oh, man.
They just kind of knew that it was something you did, right?
Yeah, all but one. One of them I had going pretty good for a while. I said, dude, I don't know what's going on. Like, everything was fine. I just took it for a test drive. And he thought he was going crazy, but I finally let him in on the gig.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, when you put a box with a button that says "Do not push," and that's the only sticker, the only thing on it was you had one thing: don't push the red button. Everybody pushed the red button. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Steve, we got you on here, Steve Fielder. So this is kind of our intro podcast for you, because you're gonna do your own podcast. What are you gonna call it?
Gone to the Dogs with Steve Fielder.
How'd you come up with that title, Steve?
I thought you'd never ask. That's the title of the book I wrote. I think back in about 2015, we published a book of essays. Particularly, I called them chapters when I first introduced it, because people say, oh, "What's an essay?" I don't read an essay. You know, sounds like English class or something. But no, that was the name that I chose, and there was a couple of reasons for that. And I put a little credit at the beginning of the book to my mother. We lived in a house where the kitchen faced back toward the dog kennels, and Mother would be and had a wide panel of windows there that she could look out across the backyard and toward the kennel. And, like a typical houndsman, well, I'm going to have a couple dogs. And then, then I got a litter of pups. And
A couple more.
And then, first thing you know, there's a whole kennel of dogs out there. And I can hear my mother on several occasions. My dad had an unusual name. It was Homan, and he got called Homer a lot. But my grandmother named him Homon. I have no idea where she got it, and no one else seems to know either. But she'd look out the window out there, and she said, Homan, we've gone to the dogs. And that was a common expression that I heard as a kid. And then once I kind of thought about that, I thought about, if this might sound morbid, but if I were to have an epitaph on a stone somewhere, which I probably won't.
A what?
But it would be that. He's gone to the dogs.
We're going to have to educate Buddy on what that word means.
Oh.
What his headstone's going to read when he's kicked a bucket, Buddy.
I got it. I'm
Layman's
sorry.
terms.
You're talking fancy words, man. I'm like, hey, say that one more time. We're going to educate for our customers that don't know.
Epitaph.
Okay.
But, I think if we're going to talk a little bit at some point in this podcast about our intro and all, and I kind of thought about that too, that it kind of has that connotation that, where's Jason, where's Buddy? Oh, they're gone to the dogs. The dogs are treed in there. And that's what a houndsman does, He follows his dogs. So I guess that's where that came from, Jason.
And so bringing up that's a good point that we're going to, because like I said, this podcast is going to be like an introduction to you. And of course you're going to, people already know you, so they're going to come here or whatever. But when you listen to our podcast, for anybody new, we try to identify the podcast by the music that's played. So me and Jason, our kind of podcast will have one music, and then Brett,
and Ben and Brett
and Ben,
Vaughn.
and now you will all have a kind of a different intro, so that basically we do that so when you hear mine, you can be like, yeah, there's Buddy. We can just turn that off right now.
We can turn that off. We don't need to hear him
We don't need
anymore.
to listen to him. But
We don't want you to suffer because people don't like me and Buddy yammering. So we
that
give
way
you
when they hear
different
yours,
music.
they're like, oh, this is going to be a good podcast. I want to listen to Steve's podcast. Those other guys, man, we can just turn it off. So
Not true.
when we do this, we're working on your intro right now, and you've given Shannon some. I mean, you're an author. You're a thoughtful kind of guy. Me and Jason, we're just like a push the button and go kind of guy, So anyways, I'm going to play you what we've got so far. We still need to get your, like you're talking about, the voiceovers and stuff, that you got some important people that you want to try and help you with that. But take a listen to this and see what Shannon's got so far. This is, like I said, this is really rough. So let's not judge. Too bad. But we're just throwing everything together. And if you were smart, Steve, we wouldn't do this, right? But we're just like a real transparent company. We're like, we'll show you the crappy part so that whenever you listen to the final thing, you'll be like, damn, they did get it right. They didn't mess it up. So here we go. Gone to the Dogs intro, rough cut. This is like hot off the press. Shannon got this done this morning, and I want to preface this, man. The music isn't right. The sound isn't right. We got to play with a lot of things left, but we're just going to give you. We want your opinion. Oh, I already messed up. See?
Then he's got to start from the beginning if he wants to get the full effect.
I was previewing it earlier before that to make sure I didn't screw up, and I still screwed up. Okay, let's try. Take 3.
Take 2.
About here, you're going to have some voiceovers that you want, which is you're going to ask, like, hey, where's Steven? Or no, where's Fielder? And somebody's going to be like, hey, he's gone to the dogs or whatever, right?
That's the idea, and there's going to be some mystery voices there that our listeners are going to get an opportunity to try to identify.
You'll have to run some kind of a contest there or something, see who can guess who they are.
Sure. Keep them
I like
guessing.
the music choice. Did you pick that music, Steve, or did Shannon pick it and kick it over to you?
No, I picked that one myself. I got to go through the library and being my roots, my dad was from Middle Tennessee, learned to play fiddle at barn dances and all when he was a kid, and that whole music scene there that eventually blossomed out of Nashville. He was kind of on the fringes of that. But anyway, we always had that kind of music at home, and that's the kind of thing that just kind of, and I like that little driving, toe tapping type thing. You're on the highway, the bear's treed, around the block. You're trying to get around there, crank it up, man.
I had to help.
I don't know. That's the kind of music that just resonates with me.
I had to help try to find the gravel sound, because there was a lot of highway sounds, and there was some sounds that had I don't know what kind of truck that is. With the music, it's hard to hear the truck, but it's I'd hear them be like, oh, that's a Nissan, and we were trying not to go with a D. There's so many other sounds out there. There's like a Peterbilt. So I'm like,
they didn't have a sound clip they have a 46 Ford sound clip there, or what?
Yeah, I was like, man, there's a bunch of different truck sounds. And it was we finally found that one with the gravel, and has a little bit of the park and brake, so you can kind of tell what's going. That was a challenging thing you put us on, Steve. I'm not gonna lie. For us to find that sound effect, I hope you like it, because there's not a bunch of. We can go Peterbilt. We got round number 2 as the Peterbilt pulls up.
Well, that's the first time I've heard it, guys, and you nailed it. That was the whole idea of a vehicle going down a country road, pulling up, stopping, rolling the window down, hey, where's Fielder?
Right.
And then the response comes back. And of course, we're going to have that hopefully for the next podcast. So
I don't know if we'll have it on the one that we're on now in the beginning.
Right.
It probably won't, just because we're kind of finicky, and Shannon does a really good job of there's parts
and
of that
you're
music
stuck
needs
with
to
it.
Fade down.
We want to make sure it's right, because you're stuck with it once it's done.
Well, you've already impressed me, because I thought all we were going to hear today was just the music, so man,
that was a surprise. That was a surprise for you.
Really. Great.
Well, Steve, do you go by Steve or?
Well, most people know me by Steve. I was named for my grandfather, and he in turn for his grandfather. I kind of have a unusual middle name. It's Ford. Maybe that's why I drive a F-150. I don't know, but anyway, the only time I got called Stephen Ford was when I was in trouble. It's usually Steve, So.
Oh yeah. Well, let's go back to the beginnings. What got you into dogs? The very first thing, was it a kid, or how old were you?
Well, it definitely was in the DNA with me. My dad had grown up on a farm in Middle Tennessee, had 2 brothers. Wasn't much for a farm kid to do back during the Depression era. He was born in 1920, and so they hunted, and they had a couple of cur dogs. And old Pat and Mike, I heard so many stories about those dogs as a kid coming up. And they were squirrel dogs by day, and primarily possum dogs by night, because there weren't many coon in that area of the country at that time. So anyway, Dad always had dogs. And he met my mother during the war, when he came home with an army buddy and saw a little sister and said, wow, this is cool. And she waited for him till he got home from the South Pacific. And she was from West Virginia. She was a coal miner's daughter, like Loretta Lynn, Mm-hmm. And they moved back to the mountains. And my dad just fell in love with that area. He told my brother, he said, when I married your mother and moved. Pardon me?
What mountains?
That's in the southern part of the state of West Virginia.
Okay.
There are 2 states. Most people don't know this. They think when you say West Virginia, you're talking about the western part of Virginia. But it was in that coal mining area, pretty rugged area, worst place that a coon hunter could possibly live at that time. But anyway, so the dogs were always there with my dad. And then he got Plot Hound fever in about 1954, so I would have been 8 years old at that time. And then from then on, the focus was on bear hunting primarily, and some coon hunting. But yeah, I probably started at about 3 years old. I tell the story in the book about riding mules with my dad and a boyhood friend of his who later became the governor of the state of Tennessee, Frank Clement, came down to the farm and brought his boy, Bobby, and Bobby went on to be in the House of Representatives. So those guys made good, and I made a coon hunter. So I don't know what can be said.
You got the better
about
end, Steve. Trust me.
I think so overall. Yeah.
So how did you get tied into Michigan? Because I've heard your name brought up in Michigan. Some of the guys, with the bear hunters and a lot of guys, they've mentioned you. Mike Thorman. Everybody speaks mostly good of you, but no.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I've heard your name in Michigan. So how did you get tied into Michigan?
Well, that all came about after I went to college. It's hard to believe, I guess, but and then got drafted because the Vietnam War was in full swing at that time, and I went in the military in '69 and got out in '73. And when I came home, Plot Days was just around the corner. I got out in July, and Plot Days traditionally was the first weekend in August. So my dad always attended that. He was not a charter member, but a longtime member of the National Plot Hound Association. So we went to Plot Days in Flora, Illinois, and I met the president of the United Kennel Club, Fred Miller. He had just bought the business that year in February and was going around to all the breed associations, getting to know people and so forth. So I remember shaking hands with Fred and meeting him for the first time. Well, the Plot Association appointed me their breed representative. And what that essentially meant at that time was that you would go to the rules committee to represent your association in the review of the night hunt rules and make necessary changes and whatnot. So I met Fred again when I went to rules committee, and I did that for a couple of years. So I'm trying to make this short. What happened? In 1978, UKC decided to have a world championship for coonhounds. They didn't have one up to that time, and there was a group called the ACHA, American Coon Hunters Association, that had their world hunt, and that was considered the granddaddy of them all. Well, UKC wanted to have a world championship, so they started that program in 1978 and hired field representatives, kind of on a per diem basis, guys that would go out and work the weekend at the qualifying hunts. And Fred asked me to do that. So I did, and I did that for about 3 years. And then in 1980, he offered me a job to come to Kalamazoo, Michigan, and go to work full-time at UKC as a field operations manager. And I turned it down at first because those cold Michigan winters and all that, it was kind of a step. But we continued to talk, and then in 1983, I moved my family, my wife and my son, Christopher, who was 4 years old at that time. We moved to Kalamazoo, and I stayed there, actually, I think about 22 or 23 years altogether.
And mostly following a job then?
Yeah. As my dad used to always say, you got to follow the money, Yeah. and it was a job, but it was kind of like a busman's holiday type thing. I knew that I was moving into some of the best coon hunting and bear hunting in the country. And so that kind of had something to do with my
Makes
decision.
it a little easier.
Mama wasn't happy with the decision at all to begin with, but it worked out.
Well, that's because it gets cold up there in the winter.
Yeah.
And you got chiggers, you got snake. There's all kinds of stuff.
Well, no. You don't have any snakes in Michigan. The only snakes I ever saw in 22, 23 years in Michigan were a few old water snakes. And they do have a little pygmy rattler. It's called a Massasauga rattler. But I never saw any of those while I was there, no. Now, that's one thing about Michigan hunting. There may be snakes in the UP. I'm not sure about that. But down in the farm country where I was.
Really?
Yeah.
And then from there, you worked at other registries too, right? Or was that your first? Or
Yeah, that was the first. Back in the day, UKC was it as far as registered dogs. If you had a registered dog, it was a UKC registered dog. There's a fellow named Jarvis Umphers that was from northern Mississippi, and he is, thankfully, Jarvis is still living. But about 1973, he started an organization called PCA, Professional Coon Hunters Association. And it ran under that banner for a while, and then it was ultimately changed to PKC, Professional Kennel Club. And I had been at UKC for quite a long time. And while I was there, promotions came and so forth. But right at the end of my days or career at UKC, they decided that they wanted me to be more involved in public relations and legislative affairs. And so the coon hunting aspect of it, the events, the working with the field reps, going out to the hunts virtually 25 or more weekends a year, kind of was taken away from me, and I was given these other hats to
you get
wear.
the political stuff. They're like, hey, hop in the politics. That's the fun stuff right there. Steve.
Oh, yeah. Well, I found I enjoyed that work. I really did, and the work I did with the Michigan. Michigan is such a great state for organizations. The Michigan Bear Hunters, the UP Bear Houndsmen, and then, of course, the Michigan Hunting Dog Federation. And so I got to serve on a couple of those boards and got involved in a lot of things politically up there. And I loved the guys, and I loved that type of work. But I still missed that aspect. And so a guy named Larry Meeks, who owned a big trucking company in Evansville, Indiana, had purchased PKC and in the fall at the World Hunt. And by January, he had, unbeknownst to me, had kind of sneaked down to the UKC Winter Classic in Georgia just to kind of see what kind of guy I was, I guess. And a little bit later on at the Kentucky Houndsman Association meeting, Terry Walker, who publishes American Cooner and Full Cry magazines and all, approached me and said, PKC is interested in hiring you. And man, I'd been a UKC man all my life. You know, that was my thing. I knew, due to some changes in events, I was never going to really occupy that big corner office down at the end of the hall. But I had been on the senior staff the whole time I was there and really loved the organization and still do. But Meeks was pretty persuasive. And, he says, hey, you can live anywhere you want to live. I don't care. I just want you to come aboard and help me do some things I don't know how to do. And Larry was a great guy to work with, and I did. I went to PKC. And
how was the breakup
there
with UKC? How were they?
How did
cool,
it go?
Or was that not so cool? Was that like a?
Well,
it's maybe nice now, right?
He's wearing a UKC hat right now.
Well, yeah, the guys that are at UKC now, and I think they're doing a great job. They took the ball. When I was getting, yards and inches. They're getting touchdowns with some of the programs that they're doing now. But Fred and I had a special relationship. Fred was the sole owner, proprietor of UKC, and I mean but he was a terrific businessman, and I could not have ever been treated better by anyone than I was treated by Fred. I never understood the connotation, but my friend Andy Johnson there that worked there, he said he's like an old Dutch uncle to us. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know what that means, but I do know that Fred was very, very good to me the whole time. So I think when I announced to him that I was going to be leaving, it was kind of like a punch in the gut to him, really. Yeah. And Fred was getting up in years and slowing down considerably, and it was, I hated to do it because I had a lot of friends both inside and outside the organization. So I wasn't the most popular.
Those things are really, really tough when you get in those business relationships. I mean, you got vested interest in stuff that you build. And
exactly.
And at the same time, if a guy's not willing to move, you know what I mean? You get stunted. You know what I mean? Like, you got to be able to move around in some situations too. Like, so I can definitely appreciate that's difficult.
Yeah, it is difficult. I kind of grew up in an era where a guy went to work in a coal mine or in a plant, and he worked there for 30 years or 40 years, and he got the watch and the pension. Yeah. And, that was his lifelong job, But now, I think, I don't know what the average rate is for someone before they, transfer jobs, but
it's like 4 years, I think. It's crazy.
So it's a total different deal. But I was a UKC guy, I really did. And I told Larry Meeks going in, I said, I know nothing about these money hunts. I've never hunted in a PKC hunt. He wanted to start bench shows in which money was awarded as prizes. That's the whole premise of the PKC group, is to award money back to the hunters. But it was a learning curve. But we had some successes there. We went from 8,000 members that fall at the World Hunt. By the time the year was over, we had 12,000. So that was like a 50% increase in 1 year, which was pretty decent. But, so I stayed with PKC for 6 years. I did remain in Michigan. I kept although he did hint a few times that maybe I should move to Evansville, but I told him, I said,
in there, he's like, you live anywhere you want.
After they set the hook.
This is funny.
How's that sound, Jason? Like, hey, you're going to be the guy that does this and this and this, and then whenever the plan rolls out, it's like, this is not working.
Sounds familiar.
Right.
Because I remember that conversation of, I'm not moving to Washington. You guys can't even hardly hunt. When you drive to Oregon, I'm not leaving.
Yeah.
There you go.
So you were at PKC for 6 years?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wanted to tell you this one little thing is kind of funny. We would always, after the event, particularly at the World Hunt in Aurora, Kentucky with PKC, and that's a whole series of podcasts in itself. One of the most enjoyable times I've ever had around hounds people and all was the PKC World Hunt. It went on for 24 hours a day for 10 days straight. I mean, it was a carnival, man. I mean, we had all the food booths outside and all. The only thing we didn't have was a Ferris wheel. I mean, it was really a fun time. And when the casts were all drawn, we'd typically go out to a local restaurant somewhere. And one night we were eating there, and Larry passed over this little slip of paper. I think he'd torn it off his napkin. And he said, "Free pass to work anywhere. Signed, Larry Meeks." He knew that I was probably getting a little concerned about he was going to make me move to Evansville. So there you go, Jace. Maybe
ease
you
your
can
mind a little bit.
You can get a I pass.
I gotta go take him to lunch and just slip a little piece of paper over to Jason.
That's it. That's it.
So Steve, let's go back on your podcast. What's your vision for this thing? What are you going to try and do? Like, you got a little time to think about, because I told you, I was like, man, whatever you want, you think about it some, you lay it out. I want to say something first to anybody listening. This is not my podcast. Like, this is yours. You own 100% of the podcast. We don't own a nickel in the show. If you crash on your own. and trust me, I've crashed enough that I'm like, whatever. But I don't want people thinking, oh, we're partnering with you or anything. You're basically, I like people thinking like YouTube. Like, you're gonna give us the file, we'll get the edits done, we'll get the preparation done, and then we'll put it on our platform. You know what I mean? So I just want to be really clear with people that it's like, hey, this isn't a 50-50 deal or whatever. You don't got to ask me what you want to talk about. You don't got to ask me what's okay, what's not okay. You send it. You know what I mean? And when you send us the file, the only thing I ask is we don't have to do heavy editing. And if you say something wrong and you want to get it fixed, we can definitely edit it. You know, just send us a timestamp saying, hey, at about 1:57, I said Jason was a good guy. I want to take that
we
back.
need to scratch that from the record.
Let's strike that part.
Yeah.
So things like that, you know, we can definitely do some editing, but our podcast, we try to hit that record button and roll with it. We're really transparent. And so that's one of the things I think of, Jason.
Well, and if I can add to that, I mean, that's kind of the concept of, I'm sure people have noticed, like, we've been adding podcasts to this feed. And the point in that is, you know, all these people, they own their own files, like Bear over at the Hunting Hound, Ben Sheets, Tree Talking Media, Born 100 Years Too Late, you know, and now Gone to the Dogs. This is all your content.
Right.
So the reasoning behind that is, you know, there's guys wanting to build a name and build a following. And, you know, if you're going to build a following, you might as well build it for yourself. So if somebody decided to leave and go off on their own, you know, we just hand over the files and it's their content. And I think that there's kind of a misconception that these are all 4W podcasts. We're just hosting it. You know, this is an umbrella where houndsmen and other dog owners can come and gather around and just enjoy. So, you know, I'm glad that it's a place where you can land and just do your own thing. And I think it's going to bring a lot to the listeners out there.
Well, I'm particularly thankful, grateful for this opportunity with you guys. Of course, you know, I don't have to tell anybody out there about the W brand and the kind of, you know, content that you guys are putting out there and the type of products and customer service and all of that. You know, you've well established yourselves in that regard. But this was a real blessing to me because, you know, back when I first got involved in podcasting, I barely knew what a podcast was. I knew it was
me neither. Steve.
You and Buddy were on the same
page, man.
It was a recorded show, if you will, or I likened it to talk radio that you record and post it to the internet. How that got accomplished, I had no clue. You know, I learned a little bit about RSS feeds and all this kind of stuff, but as far as the technical aspects of producing a podcast, this old dog is not up to learning those tricks. I can tell you that. So when this opportunity became available, I said, you know, this is really what I've been looking for a long, long time. And I am just, I don't want to, you know, start a bromance here with you two guys, but I am really grateful for this opportunity. Let's just say that.
Well, the cool thing about it is we got Shannon, and she does an awesome job. Like, she has been really helpful and kicking ass on some of this stuff. And
I see that already.
Yeah.
In a very short time.
She's a go-getter.
Because it ain't me, Steve. I can promise you that. If it was up to me, this would be a rough show. We'd be like, well, that didn't work out so well.
That's what I told Steve. I said, Shannon's great because she knows how to translate Jason and Buddy, so she should have no problem translating Steve Fielder.
Yeah.
Because I know I'm a babbling mess of ideas, and she's got a decipher what I actually mean, and she does a good job of it.
So,
Well, down through the years, I kind of explain in my book, Gone to the Dogs, A Coon Hunter's Journey, about how when I was a kid, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was probably the poster child for ADD or ADHD or whatever. I could never keep my mind on any one thing. Yeah. It would always eventually wrap around to being out of school and in the woods with my dog. That was or on a stream with my rod. But ideas for me have always come a mile a minute. I mean, they're just. I used to have to take a pad and write while I was shaving in the morning to go to work. I had to write down things because they'd come real quick, but they'd leave just as quickly because there was another one in its place.
Yeah.
And some of them were good, some of them were obviously not. But, I like to be around creative people. And so, that in itself, to know that you have Shannon and I see already, we threw out this little idea. I expected you to play music today, and I'm already getting the sound effects and everything. So it's beyond exciting for me. Did you ask me a question about how I plan, what I have planned going forward, or didn't?
So we're gonna get to that. So just for everybody's understanding, like if Steven tomorrow, if you're like, man, that buddy is a jerk, Jason's a jerk, I don't like the show, I'm just telling you right now, and this is for everybody. You're free to go. We will make sure you get your files. Like, you own your show. And I'll even help you try to figure out how to get that on your own platform if you decided you want to do the technicality stuff. If you had a change of heart, Steven, you wake up tomorrow and you're like, technical stuff just sounds like my cup of tea.
No. I can tell you right now, for the whole world, I'm like that guy in the little 500-watt radio station in southern West Virginia. He'd get up every morning, powered up. Hello, world.
Yeah, you just want to push the button and talk. That's all you want to do. So
I'll tell the whole world right now that that's not going to happen. We're going to be just fine, and we're going to hopefully that when you get as old as I am, you got a lot of memories, and memories translate into stories. So there's just a lot of those, and so if people like to hear stories, they're certainly going to hear them, and I'm not going to tell them all. I'm going to try to root out as many good storytellers as I can, to join me on the podcast. But my goal really with this thing is to say, what can we, me as the host and the listening audience out there, what can we learn from this hour and a half that we're going to spend that's going to enhance the experience of hunting with hounds, not only for ourselves, but for the dogs them too. How can we, and then there's going to be, of course, a smattering of how can we preserve this thing for the future? How can we take it forward? What can we do I really enjoyed the dialogue I heard the other day on one of your podcasts about not fighting with people. And maybe it was you and Clay, buddy, talking. I don't recall exactly, but not so much a fight as how we learn, to communicate with each other. Because, hey, there ain't enough of us to get in a great big brawl out there with the whole, population of the country. Yeah. We got to kind of, put our thinking caps on and figure out now how can we learn to get along with these people and convince them, that what we're doing is okay. So there'll certainly be some of that. We'll talk about breeding dogs quite a bit because that was a passion of mine. Working with the registries, there at UKC when they decided, I can remember when the first group of people came to us and wanted to present the idea of DNA in dogs, to prove parentage and and ancestry and those kind of things. So we'll get into breeding and certainly training. I always loved to train puppies. That was one of the things I enjoyed the most. And most of the dogs, folks can be the judge of whether they were any good or not. But the dogs that I had down through the years were the dogs that I raised and trained myself. I think I maybe bought a couple of coonhounds in my entire life. So there'll be that aspect of it. And we'll get into listener questions, and people can call in and, and say, just like you guys do with your tech tips, when guys are having problems, with their equipment, people have trouble with these dogs, if you've noticed.
Dog's a pretty big piece of equipment.
Yeah.
And I don't have all the answers.
I got to come out with an alias so I can call you, Steve. Like, hey, I got this problem. My name's not Buddy. This is somebody else. Sounds a lot like Buddy.
It's kind of funny. When I was in Japan for 3 years with the Air Force, I had a couple of dogs over there. I had to have some kind of hunting dog, so I got an English pointer pup. Somebody put a card up on the bulletin board. They had these pups for sale, and we had pheasants over there that we could hunt. So I trained a bird dog, the only one I ever did in my life, and the results weren't great, but people would they knew that I had dogs and I loved dogs on base. And these guys, I'd get a call, and even, my dog, he's off his feed and he's got diarrhea, and what do I do about this? So I kind of became, I don't know, a pseudo vet or something, but it's just always been about dogs with me. So anyway, health, feeding, hope to get some of my acquaintances on the show, guys like Dr. Arlie Reynolds, who is a nutritionist up in Fairbanks, Alaska, a sled dog guy. Have been fortunate to have him on a podcast before. Just, the whole gamut of hound hunting, I guess, from puppies, training, dealing with training issues, breeding for better dogs, and then a whole lot of experiences, trips. When I was thinking about this the other day, and to realize I've been in the room either taking the picture or on the mic or handing a trophy to 26 world champions down through the years. There's a lot of stories that go with that. A lot of stories. Yeah. And one involving my good friend Nubbin Moore is one of the funniest of all that I'll be sharing.
You got to bring him on, though. You gotta.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I know. We were trying to figure out a way. It was really short notice for me with everything going on to get to Oaks this year. And I had to call Steve and tell Nubbins, just have a pull off that muscadine wine for me, and I'll have to see you guys next year. Because that guy, man, I remember we were all going to hook up and go to dinner that first night I came out when you were with Houndsman XP. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Mark Zapp ended up, he had some stuff he had to handle. And we just ended up coming up to your room with you and Nubbins and sitting around. And I just remember sitting in there and listening to those stories. And still to this day, it's like that was, one of the best 2-hour periods as far as like in the hound world and hearing stories. That guy just knows how to tell it, and he's just got this personality that goes for days. He is a really enjoyable guy to be around. I can't wait to see him again.
I never, Will Rogers said he never met a man he didn't like, but I never met a person that didn't like Nubbin Moore. He's just that kind of guy. And he came. The way I got to know him was he won the 1984 Autumn Oaks, the 25th anniversary. He'd never been to a big hunt before. He takes his black and tan up to Indiana, wins the whole shooting match, And but he
the
was
way
just,
to do it.
Yeah, but he was just such a warm, personable guy, and down through the years we've just formed a friendship that's just, it's golden. I think the world of the guy. And there's a whole lot more besides Nubbin out there. and we'll be bringing these guys on. But I don't want it to be simply a bunch of old guys sitting around the fire talking about the good old days. I do want to talk to the guys that are out there today, doing it and getting it done, and how coon hunting has evolved from those days. Of I hunted with a carbide light when I started, and my dad with a lantern, and man, then things just went. I was trying to think the other day. It was like 1984 or 5 when I got my first tracking system. Were they even around that early? It was a wildlife materials beep beep deal, and somewhere around that. I didn't even have the receiver. My buddy Mark Blount there in Michigan had a receiver, and I bought a collar, and that was my introduction to telemetry.
We should find out when those telemetry collars happen.
Yeah,
I'd like to know. I bet you, I think Ted Craddock had some.
Yeah.
That he was using for the fishing game.
There's a guy whose name escapes me in Carbondale, Illinois, that built the receivers for everybody back in those days.
Yeah, we should.
And I don't think it was
a good interview.
Yeah.
It might hurt their feelings a little bit now. They'll be like, well, but we were it back then, and they just didn't move fast enough.
So far, and there were so many.
The concept of knowing which direction your dog was huge.
And
you didn't know how far he was.
You normally lied about it, like, oh yeah, that dog's like a mile away. Now with the Garmin, you're like 350 yards.
Well, you don't have to worry about signal bounce with a Garmin. When you take off walking the wrong direction because you're not smart enough to figure out how to read a bounce, it got a little wild, and you learned real quick.
It was crazy in those
telemetry. That was just, you got your big companies like Wildlife Materials. I think everybody knows the blue lunchbox.
Oh, yeah.
But, there were all those little companies, like I'm sure Buddy knows Butch Wheeler down here by me. He was making his own, and, there's several other companies. It was
well, Roger Johnson, who was from Iowa and then moved to Missouri with the Johnson collars, but the box that you got when you bought a Johnson collar was made by this same concern there in southern Illinois.
They're a pretty basic. It's a pretty basic platform, really. I mean, it's just a radio, like a FM or AM radio. You just have the fine tuning, and like I said, it'd be interesting to. Like I said, there's some people I think that were really early on because of wildlife. I'm sure it was done for wildlife. It wasn't done for dogs. It went from wildlife, and then we took it from the wildlife, and we started using it on the dogs, and then is what
somebody developed. Yeah, that Yagi antenna, the directional antenna that we
some radio geek somewhere.
Yeah.
And like back then, they were the day, man. Everything was high flying. It might be an interview that just stings a little. You know what I mean? I don't know if I'm the guy to give that interview because I'm going to be like, "Oh, that burnt, didn't it?"
Yeah, and they're going to say, "Let's go back to those days that were much simpler. I can figure out all this stuff."
No kidding.
I was one of those guys that was a little bit hesitant to the Garmin bandwagon in the beginning. I was like, man, a battery life only lasts 12 hours. Oh, man, that's not going to work. Oh, man, that.
Yep.
And then I seen it, and I was like, okay, I'm going to shut up now. Like,
we'll try this.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, I'm going through that learning curve right now with the 200i. I was a Alpha 100 guy, and I finally pretty much mastered that. I wouldn't say mastered it, but so
there's levels. So, there's levels of mastering, and I can tell you from a lot of different
Jedi
customers,
master.
Like many customers, like everybody, I get a call and he's like, "Oh man, I'm so stupid." I'm like, "Trust me, you're not the stupidest." Like I've had some. I'm not saying anybody. I'm not going to use names, but there is definitely levels of user ability on these devices, and I think everybody knows that. So I don't think I'm hurting anybody's feelings. Most of the guys that are like on the bottom probably know they're there and they're comfortable with it. And
buddy, Jedi Master, you are.
Exactly.
I'm telling you, I was talking. I don't even know if it's released. The one I was telling is, I don't know if the podcast was released or not. But I was telling Jason, I was like, I'm gonna start revert. You know, like a big buck, starts to revert. You know what I mean? That's gonna be me. You're gonna see me out there with like
I don't want to learn
nothing on a
anything
dog
more.
anymore. At one point, I'll be like, I've gone to the top, and now I don't want to deal with it anymore. So I'm gonna like revert back to.
Buddy's gonna run bells.
Yeah, I'm going back to bells. That's it, man.
Well, I've been hearing that a little bit, Jace. You need to get him some time off somehow. It's
Don't
Laura,
you worry.
right?
Hunting season is among us. Buddy will be
All right.
at Friday night camp here for a while, I think.
I'm actually, that's why I got to get off of this really soon, because I'm on a thing. I got to go do a thing, and then after that thing, I'm going to go stay the night and I'm going to hunt. So I'm actually going up in the woods. But after we record this, I got to hop in the rig. So, Steve, is there anything in the updates that you want to cover on this? Since we've kind of hijacked your first podcast, it's kind of a joint deal. Is there any current events you want to discuss right now?
I do, because right now is just absolutely the most exciting time of the year for coon hunters. It's World Hunt time for the two largest registries, UKC and PKC. I'll rephrase that. PKC has their Super Stakes, which is their futurity program for pups, going on right now, and then that will be followed by their World Hunt. And then, of course, last weekend, the weekend before we're recording this, the UKC held their zone hunts around the country, and now there's 104, I believe, dogs qualified that will be going into Indiana this weekend, that we're recording to compete for the World Championship title. So there's a lot of stuff going on right now. People kind of meeting each other, coming and going, as some of the guys that would maybe have a dog in the UKC hunt, and the finals coming up on the weekend. Well, they're down at Salem, Illinois, competing in the PKC Super Stakes Championship, hoping to go all the way with that one. And as they get eliminated, then they're gonna, so it's kind of, they have to juggle the schedules at this time of year. But it's just a really exciting time, and it comes at a great time for the new podcast, because I'll be able to report all of those winners, all of the happenings that are going on there, and hopefully get these happy, smiling faces. Well, you won't be able to see the faces, but you'll hear the laughter in their voices after they take home these big checks and trophies and all that goes with that. So, yeah, it's just the biggest time of the year, really.
How much do some of those checks? How much do they run? How much do they make on
They're
this?
printed on big paper, buddy, like Publisher Clearinghouse checks.
Yeah, I used to say I make big money. Those dollar bills are about 3 feet long, man. But anyway, well, in the World Hunt, I think typically the PKC World Championship winner is somewhere around $40,000. Yeah, and then there are other organizations out there right now that are appealing to the next level of coon hunting. There's the Pro Sport organization that had the first ever $100,000 winner back a couple of months ago, and they just had one here the other day that the winner, Nikki Hale from down in Kentucky, won $50,000. So the prize money in coon hunting is out of sight. But it's interesting too, though, that there's all levels that people can compete on. And there's the youth level, and then there's the local club level, and state championship level, and breed association levels, and all of these things that all comprise this, this crazy sport of competition.
Now, are they doing that with a higher entry fee? I mean, is that where the majority of the funding?
Definitely. Yeah, the $100,000 hunt was $6,500 entry fee.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean,
so that's the level
to
that
play a game.
Don't take a $200 dog, is what you're saying.
No. And that's one of the things I want to talk about too, is that success in any of these levels, or pleasure hunting, bear hunting, or whatever, is all going to depend on the quality of the dog that you're hunting. You know, you can certainly go out and play at the club level with any dog, you know, but if you want to win, which is the object of a game, right? I mean, whatever we do, we're competitive by nature. So we'll talk about that, the importance of good dogs and the different types of dogs. And there's been an evolution in our dogs of the type of dog that won back when I started out is not winning today. It's a totally different type of dog. So.
Yeah, you're going to cover some of that, I hope.
Yeah,
in your podcast. You should. Those are all awesome topics.
Especially
all right,
with
Steve,
the marathon.
As we start wrapping up here, we need a train wreck. I mean, you just kind of had a public train
Well, can
wreck.
I have a commitment here from you guys that when we get like a lost ball and high weeds talking about equipment, that I might get you guys to come on
Absolutely
every once in a while and bail me out?
Yeah,
we can do that.
So that brings me to a point. So from here on out, I don't want to say here on out, but for the next month or 2 months or whatever, I'm out. Like me and Jason, I want, and I'm doing that intentionally. Number one, because I'm an interrupting SOB. I don't want to take over your podcast. I have a problem not just like talking. So there's strike number
he's
one
babbling,
for me.
Steve, is what he's saying. He babbles.
You don't want me on your team until you're ready to have me on your team. Like, just the way it goes. I mean, it's like with one of them dogs, you're going to have to shock me. So that's one reason. The other, the real reason is I want you to establish your podcast, your brand, and I don't want to influence that. You know what I mean? Like, I really want you to own this deal. I want you to build it the way you want to build it, because I will screw it up for you, because I'll have these ideas that don't work, and I'll be like, "Oh, you should try this, or you should try that," or and I don't want to do that, buddy? Because when I do that and it doesn't work, normally I'm just like, "Oh, that didn't work," and I turn around and go there. But some people, and I'm not saying you aren't, but there's some people that are like, "Well, that was your idea," and mostly my wife, but that was your idea and it didn't work, and so I got to take my losses and your losses. So with that said, I want you to like establish your brand, establish your podcast, and when you feel like you got it together, we'll come back, no problem.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. You know, I used to always say the best ideas I've had I stole from somebody else. So, you know, I'll probably be getting lots of ideas from you guys.
I got a pile of bad ideas if you want, Stephen, man.
We got a list of stuff that hasn't worked so far. The list of stuff that works is a lot shorter than the attempts to make it work. How about that?
Yeah.
Well, I could leave one little tagline. I think as I was thinking about this podcast, you know, and I want to remind people each episode, hopefully, is that if it gets dark tonight, go coon hunting.
Oh, man.
Okay. And that also applies if the sun comes up.
I was
bear
going to say,
hunting.
I'm just going to say, if it's a night or a day, just go hunting. That's going to be the plan.
That's it. Exactly. We exclude nobody on this podcast, okay? Yeah. If you got a hound, if you can hunt field mice, you know, with a Chihuahua, we'll figure out a way to talk about it, maybe.
Perfect.
Maybe.
All right, Steve, click that stop button in the middle there.
The stop button, and that means I'll be gone, right?
Not the hang up, the stop.
Not the phone hang up.
Not the hang up, just
and
the white one with the red square.
We're training Steve on technology.
And I do appreciate it, fellas. It's been good. Thank you.